Imagine you're on a luxury cruise, gliding through the calm waters off Japan, the horizon streaked with sunrise. Suddenly, the captain announces a dramatic change. Instead of docking at the bustling port of Shanghai, your ship, the Riviera, will be heading straight to Busan, South Korea. For 1,250 passengers on board, it's not just a minor detour, it's an unexpected shift in plans that raises a big question. Why would a cruise ship suddenly have to pay $1.6 million just to dock? This isn't a story about navigation errors or storms at sea. It's a window into the high-stakes world of international trade, tariffs, and geopolitical strategy. A single decision, redirecting a ship, reflects tensions between the United States and China that stretch across oceans and touch global supply chains. Picture it like this. A luxury liner is suddenly turned into a pawn on a massive chessboard, where each move could ripple across economies, shipping companies, and even the pockets of everyday people. What seems like an isolated maritime incident is actually part of a bigger game, one where ports, tariffs, and shipping lanes become instruments of economic power. By the time the Riviera reached South Korea, it had become more than a cruise story. It was a symbol, a floating illustration of how trade policies, international law, and corporate strategy collide in real time, affecting thousands of lives and reshaping how goods and passengers move across the globe. To understand why the Riviera suddenly changed course, we need to zoom out and look at the bigger picture, the U.S. Section 301 investigation. Think of it as a legal sledgehammer designed to punish what the United States considers unfair trade practices. Under Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, the U.S. can impose tariffs, restrictions, or other measures to pressure foreign countries. And China has been a prime target for years. It all started with former President Donald Trump, who treated tariffs like weapons in a trade war. Initially, Chinese goods faced a 10% tariff, then a sudden spike to 125%. Temporary truce agreements came and went, but the underlying tension remained. The U.S. made clear maritime shipping, which carries about 95% of U.S.-China trade, was a key leverage point. Why does this matter for a cruise ship? Imagine every road that carries your neighbor's goods suddenly has tolls 3 times higher than normal. Eventually, someone has to pay, whether it's the driver, the company, or even the people buying the goods. That's essentially what Section 301 did. It wasn't just abstract trade policy. It directly affected how ships could dock, how companies planned routes, and how money flowed across borders. In short, the Riviera wasn't just dealing with a port. It was navigating a storm shaped by decades of trade strategy, tariffs, and economic leverage. The ripple effects of these policies can touch everyone: shipping companies, exporters, passengers, and even everyday consumers. The moment that turned the Riviera's journey upside down came on October 14, 2025, when China rolled out a new port fee policy. Suddenly, docking in certain Chinese ports wasn't just a matter of scheduling, it came with a hefty price tag. Ships owned, operated, or even partially controlled by U.S. entities, flying the U.S. flag or built in the United States, were hit with fees starting at $56 per ton of cargo, rising gradually to $157 per ton by April 2028. For the Riviera, this wasn't a minor inconvenience. On that single voyage, docking in Shanghai could have cost up to $1.64 million, roughly 8 times the net profit from a single cruise route. To put it in perspective, imagine planning a week-long vacation, only to discover the hotel wants 8 times your total budget before you even step inside. That's the scale of the financial shock shipping companies faced. China framed this as a retaliatory measure, a counterpunch to the U.S. Section 301 investigation. Essentially, it was a reminder that global trade isn't just about moving goods efficiently, it's also about leverage, negotiation, and sometimes making hard choices at sea. For the Riviera and its 1,250 passengers, this policy change was no abstract headline. It was the reason their luxury cruise suddenly became an unplanned trip to South Korea, setting the stage for frustration, logistical challenges, and a very public illustration of how trade policies ripple into real life. The new port fee policy didn't just exist on paper, it immediately shook the shipping world. The Riviera, cruising just 48 nautical miles from its scheduled Shanghai docking, suddenly veered off course toward Busan, South Korea. For 1,250 passengers, this meant a surprise detour, longer travel time, and frustration over missed plans. Luxury cruises are supposed to be smooth, predictable experiences. But geopolitics had turned this trip into a real-life example of trade tensions in motion. It wasn't just cruise ships feeling the effects. Cargo vessels faced the same dilemma. The container ship Manuka, scheduled to unload at Ningbo port, received an invoice for nearly $630,000, half its total charter cost, just one day after the policy took effect. Similarly, the U.S.-registered P-Tioic Express, operated by Germany's Hapag-Lloyd, also changed course to South Korea. These diversions weren't small inconveniences. They disrupted carefully timed shipping schedules, increased transit costs, and forced companies to rework logistics on the fly. And the financial ripple didn't stop with shipping companies. Often, added costs are passed along to exporters, who may raise prices to offset losses. In turn, importers can refuse transactions or negotiate harder, creating a chain reaction that affects supply chains and ultimately the end consumer. Imagine a perfectly choreographed orchestra suddenly thrown off by a single, unexpected note. That's what global trade looked like in action that week. By the time these ships docked in South Korea instead of China, the Riviera incident and cargo reroutes had become a vivid illustration. Trade policies aren't just abstract laws. They shape real journeys, affect thousands of lives, and can cause shockwaves across the global economy. While the new port fee caught many by surprise, some ships found ways to navigate around it. Take the Spectrum of the Seas, for example. Though owned and managed by a U.S. company, it avoided paying a single cent in special port fees. How? It was registered in the Bahamas, built in Germany, and carried mostly Chinese passengers on a commercial tourism program. By meeting just part of China's exemption criteria, the ship legally bypassed the fee, showing how smart planning and structural details can make a huge difference. Other companies got creative too. Okeani's Eco-Tankers, a U.S.-listed tanker company, saw the looming fees as a serious threat. Just days before the policy took effect, 2 American board members resigned, a move widely interpreted as a strategy to sidestep the restrictions. These aren't just legal loopholes, they're deliberate high-stakes maneuvers in a complex geopolitical chess game. What this demonstrates is that global shipping isn't only about engines, routes, and logistics. It's also about strategy, timing, and regulatory awareness. A single policy can trigger operational overhauls, personnel reshuffles, and rerouted voyages. Companies that anticipate and adapt survive. Those that don't risk major losses. In the world of international trade, being agile isn't optional. It's a matter of survival. And these clever adaptations set the stage for understanding the broader economic consequences, which affect not just companies, but entire economies and everyday consumers. The ripple effects of these shipping detours and port fees go far beyond the ships themselves. When U.S. companies diverted cargo to South Korea or avoided Chinese ports altogether, trade volumes shifted dramatically. For instance, U.S. imports from China dropped by 20.8% in May 2025 compared to the previous month, the sharpest decline in years. Ports in the United States felt the impact too, losing revenue and seeing fewer docked vessels, which also meant fewer jobs for port workers. Shipping costs didn't disappear, they were often passed down to exporters, who then might raise prices. Eventually, those costs reach ordinary consumers. Imagine going to the store and seeing higher prices on electronics, clothing, or toys. It's the invisible hand of global trade tensions at work. Even a single port fee, multiplied across dozens of ships, can ripple through entire supply chains, affecting goods, jobs, and economic stability in both countries. This demonstrates an uncomfortable truth. In trade conflicts, there are rarely winners. Companies may maneuver strategically, governments may assert leverage, but ultimately it's businesses, workers, and consumers who bear the cost. A policy that looks like a tool of diplomacy or retaliation can feel very real and very personal to ordinary people, whether they're passengers on a cruise ship or importing products for their business. The story of diverted ships and surprise fees isn't just about economics. It's about how international policies translate into everyday impact, setting the stage to understand the strategic lessons behind these moves. Beyond the numbers and detours, there's a bigger lesson in all of this. Control of maritime logistics is a powerful tool in global strategy. Ports, shipping lanes, and vessel regulations aren't just administrative details. They're levers that countries can use to influence trade, negotiate leverage, and even apply pressure in international disputes. Think of it like a giant game of chess. Each port is a square, each shipping lane a key pathway, and every policy, fee, or inspection is a move that forces your opponent to respond. The U.S. Section 301 investigation and China's retaliatory port fees illustrate this perfectly. By targeting shipping, the U.S. tried to pressure China economically. In turn, China used its port regulations to push back, forcing reroutes, delays, and extra costs. Shipping companies became unwitting players in a high-stakes geopolitical game, adjusting routes, resigning board members, or finding exemptions just to stay in the game. What's remarkable is that in global trade, the actual vessels, the ships themselves, are often pawns in a much larger strategy. Who owns them, where they dock, and how fees are applied can shift billions of dollars in trade and influence. It's a reminder that trade wars aren't fought only in boardrooms or legislatures. They're fought across oceans, affecting real cargo, real passengers, and real economies. Understanding this strategic layer helps explain why a single cruise ship like the Riviera suddenly changing course isn't just a curious news story. It's a small but vivid example of the wider tug-of-war shaping international trade. The story of the Riviera isn't just about a cruise ship changing course. It's a window into the complex, high-stakes world of global trade and international diplomacy. What seems like a sudden inconvenience for passengers is actually the tip of a much larger iceberg, a chessboard of tariffs, port fees, and shipping strategies that reflects decades of economic rivalry and political maneuvering between the U.S. and China. We've seen how Section 301 investigations, retaliatory port fees, and clever exemptions ripple through economies, affecting exporters, importers, ports, and even ordinary consumers. Shipping is not just commerce, it's power. And the decisions of companies, governments, and even individual board members can shift billions of dollars and disrupt entire supply chains. Looking forward, questions remain. Will shipping companies increasingly avoid U.S. and Chinese ports altogether? How will these policies reshape global supply chains, pricing, and trade flows? And what does it mean for passengers, businesses, and workers caught in the middle? The Riviera incident shows that trade wars are not abstract. They are tangible, immediate, and sometimes dramatic. For viewers, the takeaway is clear. The global economy is interconnected in ways we often don't see, and even a single policy can have widespread consequences. By watching these developments, we gain insight not just into international trade, but into how power, strategy, and economics collide on a global stage. If this story made you rethink the way global trade works, or if you're curious about the next twists in this ongoing economic tug-of-war, subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and join the conversation. Because in a world where ships, policies, and people are all connected, staying informed is the first step to understanding the currents shaping our future.